Tonight, Israel, am I on? For the internet audience watching at home, if you call the number on your screen, we'll be able to purchase a copy of Minor Adjustment Beauty Salon and mail it to you wherever you are in the United States free of charge. For those of you watching overseas, it might be a little bit more. Also, if you have any questions for Mr. McCall Smith during the question and answer period, call into the store and we can take care of that for you. This evening, Books and Books is very happy to welcome back Mr. Alexander McCall Smith, presenting the new book in his #1 Ladies Detective Agency series, The Minor Adjustment Beauty Salon. Yeah. As you all know, apart from the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series, Mr. McCall Smith is also the author of the Isabel Dalhousie series, the Portuguese Irregular Verbs series, the 44 Scotland Street series, and the Corduroy Mansions series, as well as being the author of numerous children's books. What you might not know is that he is Professor Emeritus of Medical Law at the University of Edinburgh and has served with many national and international organizations concerned with bioethics, and that in his spare time, although I'm not sure where he finds any spare time, in his spare time he plays in an amateur orchestra. Yeah. In this new book, with his characteristic warmth, sympathy, and wit, Mr. McCall Smith explores some tough questions about married life, parenthood, grief, and the importance of the traditions that shape and guide our lives. About this series, the Christian Science Monitor has said, McCall Smith is a master. There's beauty and revelation of one kind or another expertly woven into every line. Please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Alexander McCall Smith.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to find a working microphone because I find that virtually every occasion in which I have to speak using a microphone, we have microphone malfunction. So I won't tempt Providence. Well, I have already tempted Providence by saying that. There was one occasion, you know these stories about people who don't realize that they're mic'd up. You think they're apocryphal. They aren't. Because I actually had one experience some years ago. I was due to go and give a talk with William Dalrymple, who writes these wonderful books about Indian history. You may be familiar with his work. And Willie and I were in the corridor outside waiting to go into quite a large audience, about 400 or 500 people. And we were mic'd up. And Willie had forgotten the fact or thought we were turned off. And he said to me, what age are your readers? And I said, well, a range of ages. We get young readers and older readers. And he said, my readers are really ancient. You know, they're absolutely ancient. And he was transmitting to the readers in the hall. And somebody came out and frantically signaling and said, you're transmitting into the hall. And I said to him, don't worry, if your readers are that ancient, they won't have heard what you said. So this microphone works, which is a great pleasure, and it's the first one I've encountered that does work. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak for a shortish time this evening, which will give us time for questions and complaints. The reason why it's very important, I think, to leave time for complaints is that readers love to complain to authors about mistakes in the books. And all authors make mistakes. I mean, some authors make the mistake of writing to begin with. But very few, very few. Very few. I wouldn't apply that to any I've known or read. But people, readers do write in and tell you what errors you've made, usually sort of chronological errors or inconsistencies. And I've certainly made a lot of mistakes in my books. I wasn't proposing to talk about them this evening, but nonetheless, I have made them. I haven't made a mistake quite as egregiously bad as one writer who described on page 1 of his novel one of his characters as unfortunately only having one arm, and on page 142 the same character claps his hands together enthusiastically. And that, in my view, is an editorial issue. The editor should have picked that up. I wouldn't blame the author for that for a moment. I'd say that's the editor's fault, because editors should realize that authors don't have the concentration spell to remember how many limbs their characters have, and so I really wouldn't blame them. But of course, if you make mistakes, you must nonetheless always get your first line right. That's really important. Get your first line right, because in many cases that's the only line that anybody reads. And that's certainly the case with the critics. The critics only read the first line. Critics are wonderful people. They have such highly developed literary sense that they can read the first line of a book and then write a 2,000 or 3,000 word review of the book. It's quite an extraordinary talent, an amazing thing. Get your first line right, which I try to do. My first line of the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency was this. Mara Matsui had a detective agency in Africa at the foot of Kali Hill. That's it. Now you'll recognize that, where I got that from. That's Karen Blixen's marvelous book, Out of Africa. And you'll remember the first line of that is, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. And it's a lovely, resonant first line. And you may remember the movie which was made of that book, where Meryl Streep played Karen Blixen, and as the camera moves across this gorgeous East African landscape, you hear her say, with a very impressive Danish accent, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. It's a wonderful, resonant first line. I've got some favorite first lines. There's a wonderful first line in Res Macaulay's Towers of Trebizond, which is, I think, without equal. That goes, "Hold my camel," said my Aunt Dot on her way back from High Mass. And that I think really is hard to beat, because you've got something for everybody there. You've got camels. There aren't enough camels in contemporary literature, and so you've got the camel really right at the beginning. You've got the relationship, family relationships. Who is this aunt? What's her relationship with the narrator? And you've got religion with the High Mass. So really that solves everything for everybody. Mind you, there is a better first line, which I think is one of the very great first lines, which was written by a 9.5-year-old girl in a marvelous book called The Young Visitors, written in Edwardian England by Daisy Ashford. And although she was 9.5, she managed to write a full-length novella, about 60, 70 pages. And her first line, bearing in mind it's written by a 9.5-year-old girl, is really magnificent. And it goes, Mr. Saltina was an elderly man of 42. And in fact, if you mention that to teenagers, they say, well, so what? So first lines really are very important. You've got to get your first line. Now, I will speak this evening just for a relatively short time, I think probably about 15, 20 minutes. It's important to tell people in advance how long you're going to speak, because that enables them to make their plans, because many people like to have a sleep in the middle of the talk, and so if you tell them in advance it's going to be 15, 20 minutes, then they can plan accordingly. I did go to a lecture many years ago. It was an inaugural lecture at the Queen's University of Belfast by a professor who was inaugurating a chair, and he ignored the very, very strong understanding that you should never speak for more than 50 minutes on any subject, in any circumstances. And he spoke for 2.5 hours. And his subject was the philosophy of taxation. And that was a subject which was of some interest at the beginning of the talk to some of the people present, but of progressively less interest as the talk went on. And I was sitting in the back row, and I happened to be sitting next to a judge of the Court of Appeal of Northern Ireland. Now, because of minor misunderstandings between the people of Ireland and the government of the United Kingdom over the last 300 years, judges of the Court of Appeal of Northern Ireland had armed bodyguards. And this chap was sitting there with his armed bodyguards, looking at his watch. He obviously had to get out. And eventually, he had another engagement. Eventually, he had no alternative. But being a polite person, he didn't want to sort of get up and leave very prominently. And so he went down on his hands and knees and crawled out of the room, thereby posing for his bodyguards a major problem of bodyguard etiquette. What do you do when the person you're guarding gets down on his hands and knees and crawls out of the room? Do you go down on your hands and knees and crawl out with him? Or do you walk beside him as per normal, which rather spoils the point for his getting down on his hands and knees? And I'm happy to say, in the circumstances, they compromised and they crouched as they accompanied him out. These questions of etiquette are very important. You know, we shouldn't treat them lightly. I certainly don't treat etiquette questions lightly. And before I come to the United States, I always make a point of reading Miss Manners, because Miss Manners has got all the advice you need on American etiquette, and you've got major problems of an etiquette nature in the United States, and Miss Manners sorts them all out. I've got the collected Miss Manners, about 600 or 700 pages. I'm sure you'll get a copy here, and I read that, and I look at these American etiquette problems so that I can avoid making any solecism when I hit your shores. Now, as far as I can make out, most of your etiquette problems are associated with when you can wear white shoes. This is a very difficult issue in the United States. It's something to do with Labor Day, and I can't recall what the rule is, whether it's before Labor Day or after Labor Day. But because I'm a bit hazy on the rule, I've decided I will never wear them in the United States in any circumstances. We actually don't have Miss Manners in the United Kingdom. We've got Dear Mary in the Spectator magazine, and you can write to Dear Mary with your etiquette issue, and you can ask her advice, and she'll give you her advice, which is usually very funny. She has some wonderful questions. I remember years ago that she received a letter from somebody who said, "Dear Mary, our friends have a French car." Now, that in itself isn't an etiquette issue, but you'll recall the old Citroëns had a funny suspension system which inflated at the back. So the car went whoop like that. After 2.5 minutes, you put your key in the ignition, and there then followed a period of 2.5 minutes while your suspension inflated, and then off you drove. Remember, General de Gaulle drove one of those cars. And they said, our friends have got a French car, and they come for dinner with us. And they park the car up at the top of the drive outside our front door, and then they come in, and we have dinner. And then at the end of the dinner, we go out and say goodbye to them. They get into the car. They put the key in the ignition, and there then follows a period of 2.5 minutes while their suspension inflates. Do we have to stand there and wave to them during or can we go back inside, leaving them to inflate in private? I can't quite remember what her advice was, but I thought it was very good. That suspension system, by the way, was a major problem for French bank robbers, because they'd rob the bank, they'd get into their getaway car, put the key in the ignition, 2.5 minutes before they could go up. But it didn't matter because the police had the same problem, so it was it was equalized out. Now, you may be wondering where this talk is going, and indeed, I'm not at all sure myself. However, let's talk about the number one ladies detective agency. The latest book is the Minor Adjustment Beauty Salon. These titles, the Minor Adjustment Beauty Salon, is a great name for a business. I think that if a business like that opened up in Coral Gables, it'd be very, very successful. Although you could actually call it the Major Adjustment. You'd take your pick. You'd have to choose your market. Minor adjustment, and then minor adjustment in the sort of younger areas where where less intervention is required. And then in more prosperous, more senior areas, major adjustment, and then the sort of complete adjustment. But the reason I didn't make this up, you know, I many years ago I was in Botswana and I was in Machudi, north of Gaborone, and I saw this funny little business, this funny little shack, which was a beauty salon, and it was called the Last Chance Beauty Salon. I mean, who could resist that? It was anyway. Let's look at the number one ladies detective agency. This is the latest book, and the latest news from Gaborone, Botswana, I'm happy to say, is good. It always is good. We don't get any bad news from the number one ladies detective agency, because that's not the sort of books they are. They're all about quite good news, although things can go a little bit wrong. But nonetheless, they always get sorted out. And the latest news, of course, is that Makutsi is now married to Mr. Futi Radafuti, or Puti Radaputi, who is the proprietor of the Double Comfort Furniture Store. And he's a very good man. She met him at that dance class, you may recall, at the Botswana Academy of Dance and Movement, Tuesday evenings in the President Hotel. And she was late at the first dance class, and all those useless, feckless girls from the Botswana Secretarial College who'd got barely 50% in the final exams, they were there first. They got all the handsome men, leaving one rather unprepossessing man from Makutsi, and he was called Mr. Futi Radafuti. And he didn't have a great sense of movement. In fact, he couldn't dance a step. And also, he had, unfortunately, a major speech impediment, and she couldn't understand a word he said. But apart from that, it was ideal. And they got to know one another, and of course they married, which is a wonderful thing. Ma Makutsi, who richly deserved good fortune. She'd had to battle through her life. She started in Bobanong where there was nothing, and she worked and worked, and she got to where she got. And now here she is married to Puti Radaputi. And in this latest book, of course, she has a baby. And that's a wonderful event, and it's a very fine baby. And you can imagine the shoes that baby is going to get, because Makutsi is very keen on shoes. So that's all very, very positive, and she's filled with pride. And the baby's name is an issue, because she discusses what it is to be called, and eventually the baby's called Itumelang Clovis. Anderson Radafuti, after Clovis Anderson. And that's a big tribute to the author of the Principles of Private Detection, Clovis Anderson. You'll recall in the previous book, the Limpopo Academy of Private Detection, Clovis Anderson actually turns up in Botswana. He's the man who wrote this wonderful book that told them how to be a private detective. Now, that book is the bane of my life, because I keep getting requests from people saying, where can we get a copy of the Principles of Private Detection? So I'm going to have to write it myself. And when I introduced Clovis Anderson in the Limpopo Academy of Private Detection, I had to give him a backstory. I had to bring him from somewhere. So I made him come from Muncie, Indiana. And the reason, people said to me, why does Clovis Anderson come from Muncie, Indiana? And the answer is that I went there. And I found them the most charming, nice people in Muncie, Indiana. I can thoroughly recommend a holiday in Muncie, Indiana. They're very, very nice. And I went there for a conference, mystery novel conference, which they called Murder Incorporated or something like that. It was a murder conference, but not real murder, but fiction. And it was the first conference I've been to where everybody in the audience was knitting throughout. They were, throughout the whole thing. They sat and knit. And if they agreed with something, they nodded their heads and continued to knit. But they were so nice. Really, really, really nice people. So I made Clovis Anderson come from Muncie, Indiana. Anyway, so things carry on. I've got to try and sort various things out. We still have problems with the apprentices. I don't know where we're going with them. Somebody said to me the other day, listen, just how long does it take to do a mechanical apprenticeship in Botswana? And I said 15, 16 volumes, depends on So we've got to deal with that. But otherwise, everything's going absolutely fine. And I'm writing at the moment on this tour. I've been writing the next one, which is going to be called, thank you, the Handsome Man's Deluxe Cafe. And I can tell you, if I can tell you on the basis of complete confidentiality, that what it is that Ma Makutsi is going to start a little business on the side, because now she's got the resources of Futi Rada Futi and the Double Comfort furniture store behind her. And although she's going to continue to work in the detective agency, she wants to start her own business as well, which she'll run in her spare time. And so she starts this restaurant, the Handsome Man's Deluxe Cafe, and of course everything's going to go wrong. Going to have real problems with the chef, you know, the usual difficulties. And she'll have to go to Ma Potokwane, cap in hand, and get Ma Potokwane to come and help her, which she'll do. But that'll be a bit of a lesson for Ma Makutsi, because she's always been a bit prickly about Ma Potokwane, and vice versa. So it's all looking very good in the number one ladies detective agency. But I do write other books, so I might say a little bit about those. The Isabel Dalhousie series, Sunday Philosophy Club series, I'll be starting the next one shortly. The last one was The Uncommon Appeal of Clouds. Isabel, things are going very well for Isabel as well. She's now married to Jamie, as you know. That was an interesting thing, because Jamie was originally the boyfriend of her niece, Kat, her feckless niece, Kat. And Kat had this series of really, really dreadful boyfriends. And then she got a decent one, namely Jamie, and she got rid of him. And Isabel had this friendship with Jamie. She liked Jamie. Jamie was 14 years younger than Isabel. And I thought it would just be a friendship. But I came under tremendous pressure to let them have an affair. And I was interviewed by a journalist from the London Daily Express who said, "You must let Isabel have an affair with that young man." And I was shocked. And I said, but these novels are set in Edinburgh, where we don't go in for that sort of thing. And then I said, well, why? And she said, because it'd be very empowering for your lady readers over 40. So I did let it happen, and they did start an affair. And indeed, I had letters from my lady readers over 40 saying that they felt empowered by this. So things go well with the Isabel Dalhousie novels, and I'll produce another one. And then, of course, there's the 44 Scotland Street series, and that's one of my favorite series. The main character there, as far as I'm concerned, is a little boy called Bertie. And Bertie's 6. And Bertie's major problem, in fact his only real problem, is his mother. Bertie has a major problem with his mother, Irene, who is a very difficult, pushy parent. Now, we've got a very serious problem in Edinburgh, where I live, with excessively pushy mothers. We have a very high incidence of excessively pushy mothers. The Scottish government's aware of the problem, but actually hasn't been able to come up with any initiatives. Now, I don't know what the situation in Coral Gables, and in I suspect you've got a problem here of excessive pushy. Sometimes you go somewhere and you sense this is pushy mother territory. But we can come back to that in the Q&A session. I was in Vancouver some years ago and discussing pushy mothers with this chap, and he said, oh yes, we've got a major problem in Vancouver. And he said West Vancouver was the epicenter in Canada of pushy motherdom. And he gave me an example. He said he was in a coffee bar, and this woman came in with a stroller with a 1.5-year-old boy, little boy, baby really, sitting in it with his tired little arms on either side. And she came into and she pointed to him and she said, he gets so tired after his dance classes. So that can be a problem. Bertie's problem, his mother makes him learn Italian so he can enjoy Italian culture. She makes him learn the saxophone. He plays a very good rendition, does a very good rendition of As Time Goes By from Casablanca, which in his case he doesn't, because he's been 6 for the last 8 years. And I haven't really progressed him in the books. And then he goes to yoga classes called Yoga for Tots, where the children are so small they can't even sit up in the yoga positions. They have to be pushed into the yoga positions by their pushy mothers. And he has psychotherapy. He has psychotherapy from a famous child psychotherapist called Dr. Hugo Fairbairn, author of that classic for child psychotherapy, Shattered to Pieces, Ego Dissolution in a 3-Year-Old Tyrant. And while Bertie at the beginning of the books goes to an advanced kindergarten, doesn't go to an ordinary kindergarten, goes to advanced kindergarten. And when he's at his advanced kindergarten, his mother Irene goes to a floatarium where she floats in a flotation chamber to de-stress. And she's in her flotation chamber one day and her cell phone goes, and it's the principal of the advanced kindergarten, Miss Christabel McFadgen, on the line. And Miss Christabel McFadgen says, "Would you kindly come up to the advanced kindergarten? There has been an incident." And so Irene gets out of her flotation chamber, and she's quite annoyed. She goes up to the advanced kindergarten where she's greeted by a hatchet-faced Miss McFadgen, who says, "There has been an incident. One of the children has written graffiti on the washroom wall." And Irene bristles and says, "Well, why do you think it's my Bertie?" And Miss McFadgen says, "Because he's the only one who can write." And then she adds, "and it's in Italian." Poor little Bertie. And all he wants is to have a Swiss Army penknife. He wants to lead the life of an ordinary 6-year-old boy without being pushed into psychotherapy and Italian conversazione. So that's all that he wants. And every so often I give him a glimpse of freedom. And I took him in one of the books. He goes fishing in the Pentland Hills outside Edinburgh. They get lost, he and his father, and they end up at this farmhouse. The farmer's wife invites him in and gives him a cup of tea. And Bertie sees that there's a real 6-year-old boy living in this house called Andy. And Andy's very kind to Bertie. And Andy says to Bertie, "Would you like to come up and see my things?" Bertie takes him up to his room, opens a drawer, and there in the drawer is not one, but 6 Swiss Army penknives. And Bertie's little heart fills with joy at the sight. And Andy reaches out and takes up one of the Swiss Army penknives and says, "This, Bertie, is a Swiss Army penknife. The Swiss Army fights only with penknives." Which is a little-known fact. And poor little Bertie turns to Andy and he says, "Do you have psychotherapy?" And Andy says, "No, we mostly have cattle." It's terribly sad. And I don't know what to do. Every so often, what I do is I get rid of Irene for a period of a couple of months, which gives him a bit of freedom. Recently, in the most recent book, Bertie's Guide to Life and Mothers, which hasn't yet been published in the US, but been published in the UK, in that book, Bertie's mother, Irene, enters a competition run by Emirates Airlines and the Dubai Tourist Board for a tourist slogan for Dubai, and she wins with her slogan, which is "So much sand and so close at hand." And so she wins a prize of 5 days in Dubai, and off she goes. And it's a complicated story, but she has coffee spilt over her, and she has to get new clothes. So she gets the only thing in the shop in the hotel is a Bedouin lady's desert outfit, and she gets that, so she's completely covered in this Bedouin lady's desert outfit, and she's mistaken for the new wife of a Bedouin sheikh, and she's taken off into the desert to a harem, and so she goes missing. So the British chargé d'affaires does his best to try and get her back, but the sheikh is uncooperative because he's been having a bit of some problems with his wives, and Irene has fitted in quite well into the harem because she's started a book club. let's have a little excerpt from this is one of the Scotland Street books, The Importance of Being 7. Bertie's desperate for his 7th birthday. It's taken a number of years to arrive, but in the latest book, I can say he does get to the age of 7, and he's really hoping he'll get a Swiss Army penknife, but no, he won't, not from his mother, and he gets instead a gender-neutral play figure, and also he gets a large box which he's quite excited by, and he opens it, but he's very disappointed to discover it's a junior UN peacekeeping set with little blue armbands and so here's a little excerpt from The Importance of Being 7, and in this book I remove Irene for a while by having her. She's got a favorite charity which sends relief supplies to Romania, and they send out-of-date drugs and out-of-date jeans to Romania, and the Romanians don't want either, but they're getting them. And they're going to send off a big consignment from Edinburgh, and they've got 2 big trucks going off to Romania, and there's a ceremony to say farewell to the trucks. There's a piper who's going to play Will You Know, Come Back Again, and all of that. And Irene says to Bertie, we're going to go and say goodbye to the charity trucks, Bertie, and we're going to take your little brother, Ulysses. Now, Ulysses looks terribly like the psychotherapist, but that's another point altogether. So Bertie and Ulysses and Irene go down, and Bertie suddenly realizes, the trucks go off, there's tremendous, and Bertie suddenly realizes his mother isn't there, and he doesn't know where she's gone. And in fact, what has happened was that Irene got into one of the trucks to check the supplies, and they closed the back, and they go off, and they don't hear her banging on the side until they reach Hungary. And so she's out of it for a while. So they put up notices saying, have you seen this woman? It's reported to the police, etc. And so she's missing. And this little excerpt, which comes from a chapter called The Comfort of Friends, has Bertie while his mother's still missing. And Bertie's there, and he's feeling pretty blue because he's only 6, and his mother may be pretty painful, but nonetheless, she is his mother, and she's still missing, and they don't know where she is. But he has to go back to school. So he goes to school. He goes to a Steiner school, which is an advanced sort of school, and he's got the most dreadful friends there. He's got a horrible little boy called Tofu, and Tofu is the son of 2 well-known Edinburgh vegans, and but unfortunately his mother has just died from starvation, and there's also 2 friends called Pansy and Olive is a perfectly horrible little girl who says that Bertie's going to have to marry her when they're 20, and she's got it in writing. And so picture Bertie in the playground during the intermission in school, the break in school, halfway through the school day, and he's standing there in the playground, and he's feeling pretty blue. And Olive and Pansy see him, and here's the comfort of friends. They go over to him. You mustn't hold tears in, said Olive. It's better, you know, if you let yourself cry. We won't laugh at you, will we, Pansy? Pansy shook her head. Poor Bertie. You must feel awful, and just think, you were the last one to see her alive. That must make you feel really dreadful. Yes, said Olive, that's really bad. She paused. I don't suppose there's any news yet, is there? I don't think so, said Bertie. The police are looking for her. Maybe she just got lost. Olive looked at him with pity. Oh, I don't think so, Bertie. You don't get lost at the end of your own street, do you? No, I don't think she's lost. She's probably kidnapped, suggested Pansy. Olive considered this possibility. Maybe, she said. People do get kidnapped, even if they don't have all that much money. Maybe they mistook her for some rich person and are holding her in a cellar somewhere. Or an old castle, said Pansy. Could be, said Olive. Somewhere like Tantallon Castle, you know that old castle near North Berwick? We went for a picnic there once, and I thought it would be a really good place for kidnappers to hold people. Do you know if the police have looked in Tantallon yet, Bertie? Bertie shook his head. They put notices up in Scotland Street, he said. They have pictures of my mummy on them. Olive looked disapproving. I don't think that's a very good idea, Bertie. That could annoy the kidnappers. They don't like people going to the police. No, they don't, said Pansy. That's probably made it a whole lot worse. Olive agreed. I wonder if they've sent a ransom demand yet, Bertie. Have you had a letter yet? I don't think so, answered Bertie. My dad hasn't said anything about it. Pansy remembered something. Sometimes they cut off the person's ear, Bertie. Then they put it in an envelope and send it to their house. That shows they've got the person. That's correct, said Olive. I've heard about that. That happens quite a lot in Italy, but we're all in the European Union now. They may have sent your mummy's ear already, said Pansy. Maybe your dad just thought it was junk mail and threw it out. That's quite possible, said Olive. We never open our junk mail. We just throw it away. It never crosses our mind that there could be somebody's ear in the envelope. Poor Bertie. Ladies and gentlemen, I should finish now. So could I finish with a little excerpt from The Lost Art of Gratitude, which was one of my Isabel Dalhousie novels. Isabel and Jamie like to sit down and play music to one another, which is very civilized. And he's a professional musician. And this is from the end of The Lost Art of Gratitude. And it's Jamie sits down and he's written a song. And this is what happens. Isabel says, go on. It seemed to her that he was blushing. It was unusual for him to be embarrassed to play before her. They'd done that countless times before. What's wrong, she asked. I'm not sure how it's going to sound. She sought to reassure him. It'll sound just fine. It always does. She looked at him. You don't have to if you don't want to. No, I will. She asked whether he'd given a name to the song, and he thought for a moment. No, I don't want to. It's just a tune I've made up, nothing important. What's it about? Olives or potato dauphinoise? He smiled. I suspect nobody's ever written a song about potatoes dauphinoise. He played another chord as if he were looking for something on the piano. This is about losing things, he said, about thinking you've lost something and then finding you haven't. Isabel sat down next to him on the piano. I would go 10,000 miles for you, she thought, as she was now sure he would for her. That was another song altogether, something about turtle doves. Jamie began. What we lose, we think we lose forever. But we are wrong about this. Think of love. Love is lost, we think it gone. But it returns, often when least expected, forgives us our lack of attention, our failure of faith, our cold indifference, forgives us all this and more, returns and says, I was always there. Love at our shoulder whispers, merely remember me. Don't think I've gone away forever. I'm still here, with you, my power undimmed. See, I'm here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alexander. All right, folks, remember, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will get to you with the microphone. All right, let me get to you. And remember, you won't hear your voice here in the room. This is for the internet audience at home.
Oh, okay. Hi. Mr. McCall Smith? It's not? Okay. I love your book, your series. I call it Nancy Drew for grown-ups. But you said that everything always turns out well in this series. But how did you give Precious such a dreadful first husband? She had a wonderful father, a wonderful second husband, but I find the musician very troubling still.
Thank you very much for that question. That's an interesting question. Precious from Otsme was married at an earlier stage to a man called Makutsi, who was a trumpeter, who was dreadful. He was a very unpleasant man altogether, violent man, very selfish and violent. And I originally hadn't had her married, but I was under pressure at the very beginning of this series, when I first wrote the #1 Ladies Detective Agency. I was told that it wasn't edgy enough, and that I didn't have enough, I suppose, jeopardy in it, or excitement. And so I thought that I obviously had to make it a bit tougher. And so I did that by including one or two things which I wouldn't otherwise put in. But at that stage, this was before the book was published in the UK, and I was having great difficulty getting it published. And so it was a response to that. And I think that actually demonstrates, in a way, how we've become used to expecting things to be tough, in your face and gritty. And it needn't be the case. And it needn't be the case. And the view was taken that my books were too gentle. And so I had to try and increase the jeopardy, or whatever you call it, the edge, whatever cliche you want for it. And I resented it, understandably, but I had to try and persuade people to publish these books. So Makutsi, in a sense, was a response to that sort of pressure. Wasn't my judgment. However, once he was there, in a sense, it did make sense for her character, because she rose above that, and so I don't regret it too much. But that's the explanation, which is something which I haven't really talked about before. But you raised that, and it's an interesting question. I feel very strongly that we have a slight tendency to expect that things will be confrontational and nasty, and they don't have to, because most life isn't. But we feel that we have to entertain ourselves with violence and confrontation and dysfunction, and that becomes the default position, so to speak. I get attacked for being a utopian writer. People say to me, you're far too utopian. In fact, really, if you look at life around you, for the most part, life proceeds in a reasonably satisfactory fashion. And most people, even in extreme difficulties, are leading decent lives without the sort of dysfunction that seems to be our preoccupation. Sorry, you've pushed a button. A question that pushes a button is a very interesting one.
My next question's over here.
So another sort of gritty thing you did with the book, and it was so real, was to set the AIDS epidemic in the background.
Yeah. Well, that's another aspect. Yeah, thank you. It's another aspect of the same issue. I have been criticized for not putting AIDS more prominently in the books. I really have been, and people have said to me, "How can you write about Africa, sub-Saharan Africa these days, without actually making it all about AIDS?" Well, the answer to that is that I thought very, very carefully about that, and I spoke to people involved in dealing with AIDS in these countries, Botswana in particular, about the whole thing. And AIDS is there in the background. It does. Makutsi's brother Richard dies of AIDS, but we don't actually use the term, and it's not center stage. I could write those books in which I put in AIDS as HIV/AIDS as a central issue, but it would make them totally different books. And indeed, I think you've got to be very, very careful about writing about the grief of others. And people in Botswana don't want to be seen by the rest of the world as being sick. Who would? And so I think one has to be quite tactful about that. They're doing their best to combat this, but the problem is very, very serious, and has been, well, obviously much more serious before the antiretroviral drugs became available. May I just say on that subject that the United States has done so much for Botswana and other countries in Africa, but particularly for Botswana, in combating this dreadful epidemic, and you can be extremely proud of what your country has done for that. It really has done an amazing amount. They set up the largest virology lab in the southern hemisphere in Botswana. They've done major programs, and so America really has been very, very helpful in that issue.
Question here from one of our internet viewers who called in from one of the four corners of the globe.
Yes.
They wanted to know, what was the genesis of the Professor von Edgefield series?
Yes, the German Professor series, the Portuguese irregular verbs series, a very peculiar series of books. There are 4 volumes in that. There's Portuguese irregular verbs, which is the first one, The Finer Points of Sausage Dogs, which was the second one, At the Villa of Reduced Circumstances, which was the third one, and then the most recent one, which is Unusual Uses for Olive Oil. And they started as a result of a conversation I'd had with a great friend of mine. Indeed, he's the godfather of our younger daughter, Professor Dr. Norris Kaiser Reinhard Zimmermann. And years ago, we were going for a run along the towpath in the Edinburgh Canal, and Professor Dr. Norris Kaiser Zimmermann, who is a very fine tennis player, he's about 6'5", 6'6", and so he just stands at the end of the court and doesn't have to move, and he just returns the balls like that. And he said to me, "Why don't you write a story about a German professor who can play tennis?" And so I did, and I wrote a story about 3 German professors who couldn't play tennis, and they go to a conference in Zurich, and they see a tennis court, and they find a book called The Principles of Tennis by Captain Geoffrey Pembleton, former tennis champion of Cambridge University. And they say, well, here's a book, because German professors feel that you can do anything if you've got the book. And they got onto the tennis court and they started to play. But that book was written before the invention of the tiebreaker. And therefore, they never got their serve over the net, and therefore, nobody could ever win the game. And so they toss the book aside and say, so much for Cambridge scholarship. And one says, Professor Dr. Detlef Amadeus Unterholzer says, shall we go for a swim? And Professor Dr. Florianus Prinzel says, but we don't know how to swim. And Professor Dr. Detlef Amadeus Unterholzer says, but I have a book here. So I wrote that story and sent it off to Professor Dr. Reinhard Zimmermann, and he wrote back and said, very funny. And but I wrote more stories and made it into a book. And, of course, nobody would ever publish at that stage. This is before the books had taken off. Nobody would ever publish fiction called Portuguese irregular verbs. So my friend Charlie McLean and I have a small imprint, and we did it ourselves. We printed 500 copies. And Professor Dr. Norris Kaiser Reinhard Zimmermann bought 250. And that was the beginning. So that's how the whole thing started. And I do like those books about the poor German professors. They have such humiliations, and the olive oil book. There was one, Finer Points of Sausage Dogs. The sausage dog comes in when he's invited to go to the University of Arkansas to give a lecture on dachshunds, and they've got the wrong German professor. There was another one who was the expert. So he finds himself invited to Fayetteville, Arkansas, turns up, and of course has to give this lecture on dachshunds. But he's a romance philologist, so but he gives it. And then the professor of veterinary medicine from Arkansas pays a return visit to Germany, and they go. So von Wiegelfeld feels he has to take him to the vet school. He takes him to the vet school, and a student thinks he's a professor of veterinary medicine, and a sausage dog has just been run over, and comes in, and so he a long story, cut a long story short, Van Egelfeld gives the wrong advice, and the poor dog gets 3 of its legs amputated. And it's terrible, but no rail sausage dogs were harmed in the writing the story. But they make a sort of appliance for him with wheels. You may have seen these dogs with wheels. And he uses his remaining leg to paddle his way along, which is a system that works very well, except occasionally on hills when it doesn't. And this dog comes into the unusual uses for olive oil because when Egelfeld goes for dinner with Professor Dr. Detlef Amadeus Unterholzer and his wife, who own this dog, Walter, and he walks along the corridor to go off to the bathroom in the middle of the dinner, and he knocks one of the dog's wheels off and puts it back on, but it won't move. So he has to lubricate the wheel, and he finds a bottle of extra virgin olive oil.
Over here?
It's social realism.
Here you go. Remember, you won't hear your voice.
This has really been an amazing evening. Thank you so much. I love the series on TV, and I was wondering if they're going to film any more, and how did you feel about it in general? I thought they did a great portrayal, but I wanted to know your
Yes.
response to that.
Thank you for that question. I thought they did that very well. I thought HBO and the BBC did a very good job. Anthony Minghella was the original director, and he did that 2-hour film which kicked the whole thing off. And he did that beautifully. It was a film filled with love. He was, really, really very good. He respected the ethos of the books. And then they did the 6-part series. And I think that was great. I think Jill Scott was a very good Mara Matsui, as was, and Annika Noni Rose was a very good Makutsi. Both of them had never been to Africa before. And they got the body language and the accent just perfectly. Because Jill Scott's a singer, so she'd have a very good ear. But it was really, really good. I thought they did it very well. They talk about doing some more, but these film people. Film people really, they go on and on. But I had lots of lunches with them. That was my main experience. I used to meet them every year for lunch, and they said, we're just about to begin. And I decided next time I sell film rights, it's going to be to a restaurant, directly. And I'm going to circumvent the film people.
I actually have another question that came to us from cyberspace. Are you planning any storylines about the adopted children of the previous? Precious, I'm sorry.
Oh, right.
It says of the...
I think that's a misprint. I think that's the autocorrect. The adopted children that Precious and Ms. JLB Mattaconi adopted, fostered. They're fostered, actually, haven't adopted. I will bring them out a bit more in future books. They're there in the background. They're not really in center stage. I don't know why. It's just because I feel that I'm mostly concerned with Mara Matsui and Mama Makutsi and others. But I will say a little bit more about them. So the answer to that question is yes, we will see a bit more about them.
Back here, and then I'll come back to this gentleman.
Hi, I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to hear you. Thank you so much. I was going to ask a question as well. I wondered if she would ever become a mechanic. And that was one question, but I also just enjoyed Corduroy Mansions, and you haven't mentioned it. And I want to know what happened to the painting, and if Eddie got ever straightened out, and if they ever married, or did he find the lady of his dreams? So you are going to tell us more, I hope.
Well, thank you.
And I have to also, one other thing. As well as we know your wit and enjoy it, I found that my vocabulary has increased greatly with that book. I had to often consult the dictionary. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. Well, sir, firstly, thank you for your kind words, very generous words. Corduroy Mansions, I've written 3 books in the series. The first one, Corduroy Mansions. Second one was The Dog Who Came In From the Cold. And the third was Conspiracy of Friends. And I will write another Corduroy Mansions. At the moment, the problem is that I've got about 4 or 5 series, and therefore it's quite difficult to fit them in. I'm itching to write the next one in a particular series, but I write about 4 or 5 books a year, which is breaking all known rules of publishing. So it's difficult for them to find the slots for them. So Corduroy Mansions is there, ready to be written at some stage. Well, I haven't had any ideas about it, but I hope I will, because the characters are still there, including the dog, Freddie de la Haye. He was a very popular character, very fine dog. My dog characters are usually quite popular. There's Cyril in Scotland Street, who's the only dog in Scotland with a gold tooth. And then there's Freddie de la Haye, who's a very fine dog. He's had a very bad... he's had a bad past. He's had a difficult past, Freddie de la Haye. He was a sniffer dog at Heathrow Airport, and he was quite good at the job, sort of sniffing around for drugs. And then they discovered that all the sniffer dogs at Heathrow Airport were males, and there was a gender equality issue, and so. So Freddie lost his job, and they put in a number of female dogs. It was a very bad move. I mean, it was well motivated, but it was a very bad move because all the male dogs were then only interested in the female dogs, and the drugs just... Freddie then went to a very radical journalist, a very PC journalist in North London, who made him vegetarian, and also taught him to put his own safety belt on in the car. And he didn't have much of a life. And then he went to William, and then he was able to be more of a spontaneous dog, because dogs actually are, they've got they cherish spontaneity. And what a ridiculous thing to say. That really is. And then, of course, he was recruited by MI5. Because MI5 wanted, they had this flat of Russians they were a bit suspicious about. And they knew this one of the Russians liked dogs. So they thought the best way of getting a microphone in was to get Freddie de la Haye in. So they put a microphone and a bug on his collar. And he was then taken by this Russian into this flat. And he was transmitting, but the Russians became suspicious. They saw his thick collar, and one of them took it off, and they opened it, cut it open, and they found a little bugging device which said, property of the British government. with simultaneous transmission to the US.
This is not a question, it's more a comment. Thank you for somebody who grew up on the Botswana and Zimbabwe border and spent childhood there and had a wonderful, positive childhood.
Yeah.
It's very refreshing to read positive things coming out of Africa. You know, most of the books that come out of there are about war,
Yep.
AIDS, famine. You know, and my experience of having been born and lived there, that wasn't my experience, and I think it's not the experience of a lot of people, which is exactly what you said.
Thank you, yeah.
So it's a thank you for being positive about my home continent.
Thank you very much. I just agree with you. Thank you very much for that, because I think actually that is the case. We pathologize Africa, but it's a continent that has its problems, and one shouldn't turn one's head away from the problems. But I think that it's insulting to say it's just problems. It's not. There's another side to it, and the other side is really positive. And Botswana's very fortunate, because Botswana's had really very, very good experience. But Africa's had such a wretched experience in the late 19th and 20th century, for which we are partly responsible. I think it doesn't do just to bemoan that, but I think we should take into account the very positive things that are. And look at South Africa. South Africa actually really is. There are certain things there which are problematic and difficult, but look at what they've achieved nonetheless. It's really very, very significant. So I think. Yeah.
More questions. First, this customer back here.
I just have a quite a serious question, fashion-wise, about the crushed strawberry trousers.
Oh yes.
What's up with that?
Well, thank you for that. Crushed strawberry trousers occur in a number of my books. They occur in the Isabel Dalhousie books, where Toby, one of Kat's very unsuitable boyfriends, he wears crushed strawberry trousers, and she doesn't like his trousers. Isabel doesn't, and she fantasizes he's a skier, that he's crushed in an avalanche, and all you see the two crushed strawberry legs coming out of the out of the snow. And then crushed strawberry trousers appear in the Scotland Street books. We have frequent mentions of crushed strawberry trousers. Matthew, whose fashion sense is perhaps not top of the range, he wears crushed strawberry. He gets crushed strawberry trousers and distressed oatmeal sweaters, and that's a that's a color which I think I invented, and I love the idea of distressed oatmeal. And but crushed strawberry trousers, I think they're associated. There's a certain sort of social cachet with them. Crushed strawberry trousers, and I don't know what the situation in the United States is, but crushed strawberry trousers if you wore crushed strawberry trousers in Scotland, for example, it's signing up to a certain sort of social attitude. It's ultra preppy, to use. I don't know whether crushed strawberry trousers are popular in the United States. No, but it's a question of time. I think. Oh, yes, yes. Well, the New York Yacht Club, you'd see them there, I suspect, in a very swanky yacht club. You may, if the light's right, you'd see some crushed strawberry.
I have a semi-serious question about craft. Could
about
you just craft?
Yeah.
Could you just mention something about point of view? I mean, your books tend to be multiple point of view, or third person as opposed to first person.
Yes.
Just kind of like to know your take on that.
Yes, I suppose. No, that's very interesting, very complex question. I don't write very much in the first person. I do some short stories in the first person, but I tend to favor the third person. I'm very conscious of the fact that inevitably, even if one has, as you say, a multiple point of view, or that you are likely to, the authorial voice is likely to intrude, and that's something which I find myself embarrassed about, and I try to avoid, and yet I acknowledge that it's there. What I think I'm aiming for in terms of writing craft. I'm aiming for a certain intimacy of contact between author and reader that I think is very well achieved in, for example, Somerset Maugham. Somerset Maugham is quite interesting, actually. He's dated in some respects, but he's got a very intimate voice there, and you feel that somebody's telling you a story. And if one can achieve that. The difficulty, of course, is that you don't want to be too self-conscious about stylistic issues, because I think that if you're self-conscious, the spontaneity and the integrity of the narration can be compromised. So it's a tricky issue. I also have, I think, different voices for different series. So Isabel's different from Makutsi. My latest book, Trains and Lovers, and I've got a new book coming out in a couple of weeks called The Forever Girl, which is different again, very different again. That's a self-standing novel. That'll be published here in the US in a couple of weeks, early February, and that's that's quite a romantic tale, and again quite different voice. Yes, could that lady ask
one last question before going to the signing? Thank you.
I saved it for last purposely.
Yep.
What about Belgium?
Belgium, right? Yes. Now that's a very deep and important question. Belgium. The reason why I'm asked about Belgium is that in the Scotland Street books, there's Angus Lordy, one of the characters, writes a new hymn, and he writes this hymn about Belgium, which goes, "God's never heard of Belgium, but loves it just the same." And it's so ridiculous. Thank you.
All right, folks. One last bit of business. For those of you watching at home, remember, if you are so proud of the question you asked and you want to see yourself ask it again, all of our live stream events are archived. So you can visit the Books and Books website, go to the link, and any author appearance that has been live streamed, you can watch. I believe it looks like Alexander has a question.
I've got one. Yes, I've got a question. I've got. This is the end of this brief tour. I've been in at the Key West Literary Festival, which is quite a place, and my goodness, and then I did an event in Tannibal and now this. So this is the end of this short tour. And I've got 3 books here, which I'd like to give away, which I've been using for the tour. So I'd like to give them away to people of particular moral merit. And I think I would self-nomination is perfectly acceptable. So if you've got a friend with you and you think that friend is particularly morally meritorious, could you identify?
Raise your hand.
There we are. You've got a friend.
I have a friend, Patricia Ireland, standing right there. Where's
Patricia Ireland.
Patricia just fled, I believe.
gathered all of us here?
Oh, right. Where is
Writing trivia back and forth all week long.
is she there? Is that Patricia?
I am not Patricia.
No, where's Patricia?
No, Liz.
You can save it for her. You can save it for her.
I'll write it out for Patricia. And should I say, I'll say...
Is the ex-president of the National Organization of Women. She appreciated your equity for dogs.
Okay, so for Patricia, and then should I say for particular merit or for no, let me say for Patricia, for general excellence. There we are. So we've disposed of one. This is there we are.
See a lady in the 3rd row has had her hand up.
Yes.
I'd like to nominate my friend Terry Bridges, who not only has read this series, but has organized this outing for us so we could all enjoy your book.
There we are. So I'll say for Terry, for general excellence as well.
Our owner is right over there. Who is our next candidate?
Next candidate? Yes, Mitch.
I would like to identify Ruth Ann Vogel, who's sitting in the very front row, who is one of the greatest school librarians in
The country.
Ruth. Is that Ruth?
That's her.
Well done. Thank you. And with an E.
Folks, while he's signing, let me give you a couple bits of business. Remember that the signing line is moved to the other side of the store. At the end of the event, let me steal Alexander from you, and I'm going to take him out through that curtain to take him to the east side for the signing. Yes, I was going to say...